This is a speculative, Tolkien-inspired tale, imagining how the events of Middle-earth might have unfolded had Gil-Galad, the last High King of the Noldor, survived the fateful Battle of the Last Alliance. This story draws upon the world and lore of J.R.R. Tolkien, though it is strictly a work of fan fiction. It was upon the slopes of Orodruin in the Dreadland of Mordor that the fate of Middle-earth hung in the balance. The last alliance of elves and men, led by Elendil the Tall and Gil-Galad the High King, had endured a 7-year siege at the very gates of Barad-dûr. Armies of elves, men and dwarves stood resolute against the unrelenting horrors of Sauron. Each wave of orcs, trolls and evil men had been repelled in turn by the unwavering valor of the Free Peoples. At last, the confrontation that would determine the fate of the West came to pass in the tumultuous shadow of Mount Doom. In the original telling of this grand tale, Gil-Galad and Elendil perished together, inflicting a mortal blow upon Sauron. Isildur then cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand, ending the Dark Lord's physical form. But in this alternate recounting, fate took a different turn. In the crucial moment, as Sauron's rage flared and his burning grip threatened to consume them both, Elendil and Gil-Galad struck in unison, blade and spear biting deep. Elendil's sword, Narsil, shattered when it collided with the Dark Lord's mace, but it channeled enough might to drive Sauron to his knees. Meanwhile, Aeglos, the legendary spear of Gil-Galad, glowed fiercely as it pierced the shadowy armor. Fiery malice erupted in a final flash of the Dark Lord's wrath, scorching Gil-Galad's armor to red-hot brightness. Yet, in the final breath before his own strength failed, Gil-Galad found a measure of deliverance. Elendil's desperate shield bash distracted Sauron for a heartbeat. The High King, though grievously burned, managed to twist away, loosening Sauron's iron grip that would have immolated his flesh entirely. The flame died in Gil-Galad's chest before it consumed his heart. Yet Elendil, robbed of that final fraction of a second, was struck down by the failing Dark Lord. The ground trembled under the weight of Elendil's great fall. In that moment, Isildur came forward, having spied his father's downfall. He seized the hilt shard of Narsil, cutting off Sauron's ring-bearing finger and severing much of the Dark Lord's power. Sauron's form collapsed, his great shadow disintegrating, and in the confusion none noticed that Gil-Galad still drew shallow breaths. Only the elven lords nearest to him, those who served under his banner, would later uncover their king lying pale in the dust, armor blackened and limbs trembling, yet living. They rushed to him, parted the burned cuirass from his chest, and found, to their amazement, that although he was horribly wounded, he had not departed Middle-earth. Thus was the High King spared from what seemed a certain doom. In time, he was brought to the tents of the healers, far from the scorched plain. His burn was grievous, coursing along the right side of his body where Sauron's flaming hand had seized him, and none among elves or men could be certain he would endure. Yet the grace of the Valar, as some believed, lay upon him. Gil-Galad still drew breath. The darkness of delirium and fever lay upon Gil-Galad in the aftermath of the battle. For weeks he teetered between the waking world and that pathless realm that beckons the spirit in times of grievous hurt. Elvish healers worked tirelessly with their herbs and songs, weaving spells of restoration. They sang lamentations even as they labored, mingling sorrow and hope in a single breath. So dire were his injuries that few believed he would open his eyes again. Messengers bore word to Irinion Gil-Galad's few remaining kin in Lindon that their lord might never return. Yet, in defiance of despair, his heartbeat persisted, quietly stubborn, as though the spirit of old Finwë himself lent strength to this last heir of the line of Fingon. One evening, when the watchfires smoldered low, an attendant in the tent of healing gazed upon the High King. She saw his eyelids twitch, and slowly they parted. Gil-Galad's voice, faint as a distant reed pipe, asked for water. At once, a flurry of cries resounded. Elrond Half-Elven, who had been close to the High King's side since the founding of Lindon, rushed to his friend's bedside, tears glistening as he bent low. Softly, as though gilded with new hope, Elrond spoke. "Gil-Galad, my king, You have returned to us from the brink." It was then that the truth rushed back into Gil-Galad's mind. Memories of the Black Plain, the whirling flames, and the crushing fear threatened to overwhelm him. He recalled the face of Elendil, pale and set with determination as he made that final blow. He saw in his mind's eye Aeglos piercing through burning metal. Then he thought of Isildur, tears of both victory and grief in the heir's eyes, severing the ring from Sauron's finger. And Gil-Galad wept for his friend Elendil, the noble king of Arnor and Gondor, who had been lost. Nonetheless, overshadowed though his spirit was by grief, Gil-Galad was a Noldo of great fortitude, and he would not allow sorrow to defeat him. With time, the healer's song soothed his spirit, and the extraordinary resilience of the Eldar saw him gradually mend. Months passed in slow recovery, as the allied armies dismantled what vestiges of Sauron's power still lurked in Mordor. At last, when the elves prepared to depart the Black Land and journey westward towards their homes, some to Lindon by the sea, some to Imladris in the misty mountains, Gil-Galad was well enough to ride a litter borne by steadfast horses, able, at least, to see the receding smoke of Mount Doom with his own eyes. Yet not all was well in the triumphant hush that followed. Word spread that Isildur had claimed the One Ring as weregild for his father's death, resisting Elrond's counsel to destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom. "The ring's fate is not ended," Gil-Galad murmured in a weak whisper to Elrond as they departed. "I fear that seed of evil shall torment Middle-earth once more, though how and when, I cannot say." Even as Gil-Galad's body healed, his spirit carried the weight of foreboding. He had felt the searing might of Sauron directly, a scorching malice that burned body and mind alike, leaving an unseen wound deep in his thoughts. More than once, he woke from uneasy dreams in the quiet hours, imagining he heard the fell voice of Sauron echoing in the corners of his tent. "I shall not be so easily undone." Despite such shadows, the High King could not deny the magnitude of the victory. Barad-dûr was cast down, and Sauron's hosts were scattered to the winds. The Black Land was empty now, once again under the watchful custody of the victors. The White Tower of Minas Anor and the new city of Minas Ithil stood guard over the land of Gondor. Arnor, though battered by war, still shone as the realm of the Dúnedain in the north. Gil-Galad took comfort in these achievements, even as he wondered what burdens would weigh upon the future. The road back to Lindon was a long one, and Gil-Galad travelled with a host of elves who tended to him daily. Elrond, though his counsel was needed to guide Imladris, insisted upon accompanying the High King until he was strong enough to ride unassisted. Slowly, Gil-Galad's strength returned, and by the time they reached the fair region of Eregion, still scarred from earlier wars against Sauron, Gil-Galad rode upright upon a great grey stallion. His right side remained stiff, and his arm was bound in a sling, the burn scarring visible along his neck and temple. Yet his eyes, bright with renewed resolve, belied the weakness of his body. In Lindon, the grey rain curtain parted to reveal a shimmering welcome. The sea, glinting under the sun, greeted its king with ceaseless, soothing whispers. The harbour of Mithlond, otherwise known as the Grey Havens, was abuzz with news of Gil-Galad's unexpected survival. Círdan the shipwright, who had long served Gil-Galad, met the returning host upon the quays. He clasped the High King's uninjured arm in both hands, gazing upon the painful scarring of his friend, sorrow in his sea-grey eyes. "Yet you live, Gil-Galad," Círdan said in a trembling voice that rarely betrayed deep feeling. "The West has been granted a reprieve from its darkest hour. I feared we had lost the last of the great High Kings of the Noldor upon this shore of the Sundering Sea." "Your fear was my own, friend," Gil-Galad answered, voice low. "But our doom has not yet found its end. The war is won, but the malice behind it remains in some measure. I would speak more once I have rested and tended to the tasks that await us." Círdan nodded gravely. Even as a measure of relief mingled in their hearts, each sensed that their roles in shaping Middle-earth's future had just begun anew. There was celebration in Lindon upon Gil-Galad's homecoming, but it was subdued by the sorrow of so many who did not return from the battle. Lamps were lit in high towers shining out over the western sea in memory of the fallen. The elves, with a sorrowful familiarity, sang laments for Elendil and for those mortal heroes who would never set foot in their native lands again. Gil-Galad's own scars served as a constant reminder that the peace they had earned came at a great cost. While the High King convalesced in the great halls of Mithlond, watchers along the borders reported sporadic sightings of orcs. Fleeing the wreck of Mordor and the ruin of Barad-dûr, these scattered bands still harried the borders of Gondor and occasionally ventured northward to the Misty Mountains. Rumors even told of dark creatures skulking near Dol Guldur in the southern reaches of Mirkwood, an ill omen that dwarfed the fleeting sense of victory. In council with Círdan and Elrond, Gil-Galad wondered aloud about the One Ring. If Isildur destroyed it, the shadow would be altogether lifted. But he did not. Now that foul thing passes down a path beyond our sight. It may vanish, or it may reappear when the West is least prepared. We must ensure the watchful peace of our realms, or else the victory of the last alliance will slip through our fingers. In that conversation, Gil-Galad's course was set. Though he remained Lord of Lindon, he decreed that the elves' vigilance must extend further east, ensuring that if the enemy's remnants stirred once more, they could be contained and put to flight. With Círdan's ships at the ready, some might sail westward into the Undying Lands for a final rest, but the High King himself would not yet leave. As he told them, "My duty remains in Middle-earth for as long as any threat of Sauron's shadow lingers." True to his word, Gil-Galad journeyed to the realms of men to honor the sacrifices of the last alliance and to offer counsel. First, he rode north, crossing into the broad lands of Arnor, Elendil's domain, now ruled by Isildur's nephew Valandil, for Isildur himself had journeyed south to Gondor. There the High King moved quietly among the Dunedain, who still reeled from the losses of the war. Many recognized him immediately by the regal bearing of the Eldar, though a hush fell whenever folk saw the burn scars upon his arm and face, an unsettling reminder of what he had survived. Valandil received Gil-Galad in the great hall in Anumanus, where the banners of Elendil still hung. The young king was uneasy before the legendary elf lord, for Gil-Galad was of an age and might beyond the grasp of mortal measure. Yet Gil-Galad knelt and spoke words of gratitude to Valandil for the valor of his father and his kin, acknowledging that without men, none of the free peoples could have prevailed. "You do me great honor, High King," Valandil replied, voice trembling with youthful vigor. "But I fear I am not the lord my fathers were. Arnor is weakened, its cities half empty after the war. We have no great power to bring you in turn." Gil-Galad's face softened. "Yet you have resilience and heart, Valandil. Remember that your father and your grandfather before him entrusted in you the hope of men. I come not seeking might or armies, but a promise that the watch upon evil shall never slacken. If the day comes when the One Ring reappears, or if orcs plague the northern passes, we must stand together." Valandil rose, laying a hand upon the elf lord's uninjured shoulder. "On my life and that of my heirs, we shall keep that watch. Arnor may be diminished, but I swear it shall never be found wanting in vigilance." Moved by the king's sincerity, Gil-Galad bowed, and thus was sealed a renewed alliance between Arnor and Lindon. It would be tested in centuries to come. From Arnor, Gil-Galad made a stately progress southward, passing along the great road by the Misty Mountains. He visited Imladris to confer with Elrond, then traveled across the Gap of Rohund until he reached the blossoming realm of Gondor. There, Isildur was long delayed, seeking to establish the line of Meneldil in Minas Anor before making the ill-fated decision to journey north. Alas for Isildur, the day of his departure from Gondor had come too soon. He had left months before Gil-Galad arrived, taking the One Ring with him. The High King, hearing of this, felt a chill of dread. Unbeknownst to him, that small band of survivors traveling the Vale of Anduin would meet disaster upon the Gladden Fields, where Isildur was lost, and the ring vanished from knowledge for many years. In Gondor, Gil-Galad found Meneldil, Isildur's nephew, newly overseeing the southern realm. The stone of Anor had been placed upon the high tower, and the white tree blossomed in the courtyard. The city still gleamed, its walls polished anew after the final battles with Sauron's forces. There, Gil-Galad offered his counsel. Long may the towers of Gondor stand as a bulwark of the West. Trust in your own strength, but do not discount the fellowship of elves or the counsel of the wise. We have all bled to purchase this victory. Meneldil, mindful of his stewardship, bowed. I shall not forget, my lord. My door will always be open to the Eldar should the East stir again. Satisfied that Gondor's vigilance would not waver, Gil-Galad departed, though never without a certain heaviness in his heart for Isildur. He felt the chilling sense that something dire had befallen him. As his host rode away, the setting sun turned the white walls of Minas Anor a brilliant gold. Another fleeting promise that the days of light might endure. No more. Years turned into decades, and Gil-Galad's presence helped nurture a measure of stability among the free peoples. In Imladris, Elrond and Celebrian, daughter of Galadriel, made their home, forging a refuge of wisdom and healing. In Lothlorien, Galadriel and Celeborn dwelled among the Malorn trees, and the Golden Wood grew in beauty. Dwarves busied themselves rebuilding trade routes, and even the hobbits, those peaceful folk who had begun to settle in the fertile regions west of the Misty Mountains, lived in relative peace, unharassed by the war that had battered the world beyond. For many, the shadow was but a memory. Yet memory was precisely what Gil-Galad warned against forgetting. He traveled periodically between Lindon, Imladris, and even the fringes of Mirkwood, observing changes in the great forest. Once he ventured secretly to the southern part, finding Dol Guldur overshadowed by a brooding darkness that seemed to slumber. He felt an uneasy presence there, but could not discern its true nature. Upon returning, he shared his misgivings with Elrond and Galadriel, and they too agreed that a secret evil might be taking root. Still, as centuries wore on, Gil-Galad recognized that the length of his days in Middle-earth might be nearing a natural conclusion. Many of his closest kin had departed over the sea, and the power of the elves was beginning to wane. His old injuries, though healed outwardly, manifested in occasional pains, and he felt a slow weariness not common to the Eldar. He was loath to abandon Middle-earth, for he had fought and bled for its freedom, yet the call of the West tugged at his spirit. Perhaps, he said to Círdan one crisp evening on the quay, my role is to remain until a new shadow arises, or until the One Ring emerges. Though the Valar have called us home, I cannot rest easy while the future of Middle-earth remains uncertain. Was I spared from Sauron's grasp only to sail at once, leaving the realms of men to their fate? Nay, my heart forbids it. And Círdan replied, your devotion might be the very reason the Valar allowed you to tarry, my friend. For even if the darkness stirs once again, the memory of Gil-Galad's valor shall strengthen the hearts of those who resist it. Though many believed the Dark Lord vanquished, certain wise ones did not forget the prophecy of evil's endurance. During a council in Imladris, Gil-Galad sat with Elrond, Galadriel, and other elven lords, discussing the scattered tidings of orc raids and a nameless shadow lurking in Middle-earth's eastern reaches. Dwarves from the Lonely Mountain reported sightings of monstrous creatures beyond the withered heath. Rumors spread of men in the east who still worshipped the memory of Sauron, bearing black banners in secret gatherings. There is no immediate threat of open war, said Elrond. But evil is rarely idle. As the centuries pass, we must not let vigilance fail. Galadriel, her gaze distant, added in a soft yet resonant voice, I perceive subtlety in this new shadow, a cunning that seeks not open battle, but slow corruption. We must guard not just our borders, but also our hearts. For despair and greed can take root unawares. Gil-Galad nodded, fingers drumming upon the hilt of Eglos, which he still bore as a symbol of his lineage, though the ancient spear had been set with new runes for protection. Then let us share knowledge and stand united. If a time shall come when force of arms is needed once more, we shall be prepared. So, in an unspoken accord, the wisest of the Eldar agreed to maintain a network of watchful guardians, each prepared to sound the alarm should an ancient malice stir openly once again. By the time 1,000 years had passed since the Battle of the Last Alliance, Gil-Galad was known among men not merely as the High King of a fading Noldorin line, but as a living legend. Tales were told of the Elf Lord, who had defied the Dark Lord's fire and lived to speak of it. In some stories, he was said to be impervious to flame. In others, his spear was rumored to burn with a perpetual blue light, capable of banishing wraiths. None fully captured the quiet resolve of the actual king, who preferred to walk among his people without pageantry. In Lindon, the population of elves had diminished as many departed over the sea. Still, Gil-Galad refused to sail. He walked the quays, observing each new vessel readied by Círdan, bidding farewell to friends and kin who sought the blessed realm. Often he felt a pang of longing, for he knew the West would heal his hurts and grant him peace from the memories of war. Yet each time, his resolve held firm. Those centuries more would pass, one final task remained for Gil-Galad: to ensure the safe transition of Middle-earth into an age where men would be the stewards of its fate. He recalled a vision, in the delirium of his injuries, of a bright future in which men would rebuild kingdoms, where the hobbits might dwell in green fields untroubled, and where elves who yet tarried would be guardians of memory rather than sovereigns of lands. When at last the rumors of a growing darkness in Dol Guldur became too many to ignore, Gil-Galad convened a White Council with Saruman and the other wise. There, his voice of experience and tempered caution guided the decisions that shaped the future struggles against the enemy, now perceived to be the lingering spirit of Sauron. And though lesser in open might than in the days of the Last Alliance, Gil-Galad's presence was a rallying force, a reminder of the time when elves and men stood side by side to cast down the Dark Lord. In this speculative vision, the legacy of the Last Alliance did not end with the death of its elven leader. Gil-Galad's survival granted Middle-earth a protector, one who had felt the fire of Sauron and emerged, scarred, yet unbroken. His presence kept the bonds between elves and men strong through the centuries, ensuring that when the darkness inevitably stirred anew, the West stood better prepared. No single victory is absolute in Middle-earth. Gil-Galad well knew that as long as the One Ring remained, the Free Peoples could never fully rest, but in surviving the fury of the Dark Lord, the High King had claimed a new measure of time for those who inhabited Middle-earth. Time to fortify their realms, nurture the seeds of wisdom, and preserve the precious beauty for which they had fought so bitterly. And so, in this alternate telling, Gil-Galad does not fade swiftly into the lore of the Second Age, but endures well into the Third, offering counsel, forging alliances, and inspiring hope. His close friendship with Elrond and Galadriel stands as a bulwark against the creeping despair that so often arises in times of peace. When, at last, the War of the Ring would draw near, in a future far beyond the scope of many mortal lifetimes, the High King's influence, his determined spirit and unyielding resolve would persist, woven into the very tapestry of the West's resistance. Even the memory of Elendil would live on in Gil-Galad's words. "I fought beside Elendil, and he was the greatest of men, unbowed even by the tyranny of the Dark Lord. Let none say men are weak or transient." He would speak thus in councils among elves, defending the cause of mortal kind, for he had witnessed firsthand the unbreakable courage they could summon. Yet the ages of the world pass, and eventually even the mightiest elves weary of the mortal shores. Perhaps one day, if he judged that the shadow had truly waned or the final confrontation was at hand, Gil-Galad would choose to depart over the sea, seeking the peace of Valinor and the healing that only Aman could bring. But until that day, the High King stood watch as the guardian of a fragile peace, a living bridge between the heroic past and the uncertain future. Thus ends the speculative tale of what if Gil-Galad survived the battle of the Last Alliance. Instead of passing beyond the circles of the world at the apex of victory, he lived to shepherd the Free Peoples through the early centuries of the Third Age. Scarred and tempered by his brush with death, the last High King of the Noldor became a vigilant keeper of unity, an unspoken reassurance that if ever Sauron should rise anew, Middle-earth would not stand alone. And though history is ever shaped by small moments of choice, this one alteration, Gil-Galad's survival, ensured that the flame of hope in the west burned brighter and steadier, a light that guided elves and men through the long twilight toward the dawn of a new age.